Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So here we have good news, and more good news. So, first, A&E visits in England down to record low. Now, of course, the predominant reason for this is because people are too afraid because of the coronavirus. But the good thing from that is that people then get it in their head that, oh, maybe I don't need to go to A&E because of these things that previously I would have done, because they're not as bad as Covid-19. In which case, if that habit carries through, then you don't need to worry so much about a nationalised health service encouraging all the wrong sorts of behaviour. If people have to pay for things, then of course they're not going to go for things that they don't have to go for. Whereas if they're already paying for things and they have to pay for them, and it doesn't matter how many times they go, then they're not going to be discouraged from going, as we see in any sort of socialised healthcare, as we see here. The possible issue which could be raised is to say, well, what about cancer treatments and the like, and elective surgeries being postponed? So, well, that's not really an A&E issue. If people actually do have an accident and it is an emergency, they will be going to A&E, because otherwise they will die. In which case, it is worth the risk for coronavirus. I'm sure we can all remember when MRSA, the superbug, the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, was a big deal. And we all seem to have gotten over that, of course. A couple of hundred years ago, you were safer out of a hospital than in a hospital because of all the infections. And because of people using antibiotics too much, we were then concerned that the superbugs would be too deadly, and therefore we would return to such a state when hospitals cause more harm than good. But nonetheless, it seems that people are okay with them, and therefore going to them arguably too much. And so if this habit can continue on, then it looks like we might be able to find a new normal in a positive way, whereby people who don't have to go to A&E won't be going to A&E, which would be ideal. Moreover, in a similar vein, as we've seen the calls go up instead of visits, so the 111 calls, that means, of course, that the doctors can do things remotely, and if possible, then diagnose and help make the prescriptions over the phone or through a video call, which makes it so much easier to keep appointments, as well as, of course, not overrun and schedule things in so much better. So that is also a possible positive. So, more good news. Coronavirus may never go away, World Health Organization warns. And yes, this is good news, because if it is something that is so infectious and so hardly fatal that it will never go away because it will keep coming around, then that means that it isn't such a big deal, just like seasonal flu. And I know that is just a meme at this point, but nonetheless, that is a fair similarity draw if it's something that will never go away. Of course, it's worse in the winter because it's colder and there isn't the sunlight, in which case the virus will last longer. But in the summer, when it's warmer, more humid, and there is sunlight, there's ultraviolet rays, then viruses are killed significantly quicker. That's why we see UV light, sunlight, being used in airports like Hong Kong and Heathrow in order to disinfect various items. So they're saying that we should come to terms with the virus. There might be a vaccine, of course, but at that point it'll be, well, is the vaccine actually worthwhile, considering that you can have a worse fatality rate from a vaccine than from the virus itself? Not necessarily because the vaccine of the virus is a killer, but because of other things that are mixed with it, which could have all sorts of side effects. Some of them are purposeful. For example, sterilization in India, I believe it was, from Bill Gates. That was a purposeful side effect, in which case you can't really call it a side effect. But nonetheless, moving over to more good news, that Trump says Dr. Fauci's warning is not acceptable. Of course, he wants people to be able to decide for themselves what they want to do, and is therefore not saying that you will have to be locked down, instead of trying to encourage to say, well, do lift the restrictions, but at the end of the day, they're your states, they're your cities, they're your counties, so it's your decision to do what it is that you want to do. Just bear in mind that the Constitution will not be infringed, so do make sure that it does still go in accordance with the amendments, of course. So when it comes to experts, as we've said before on this channel, that they are fantastic in their particular field. Hopefully. Sometimes they're wrong, but chances are they're going to be better than other people in their particular field, which is great. It is exactly what you want. However, it does mean that they don't know a lot in other fields. The point of specializing is you can get really good at one thing or a handful of things, but you're not amazing at a load of different things, in which case you pick the most pressing issue. So, for example, we have a very infectious, fatal disease, virus, in that case, we'll call the epidemiologist, ask what should be done, even if it's a doctor who hasn't treated anybody for more than 20 years, and say, okay, what do you think should be done? And go, well, ideally, we're going to lock down the entire country, at which point you'd go to other people. It could be people who are regular doctors to say, well, that's not good because that decreases your immune system. It could be for more mental health or social, in order to say, that's not good because people need that interaction. You could go for economic and say, that's not good. People are going, the economy is going to suffer horrifically. You could go to other well-being or almost sociology, if you will, to say, that's not good because we're going to see an increase in domestic abuse, divorce, and suicides, substance abuse, overdosing, that kind of behavior. So maybe a full lockdown isn't a good idea. So let's look into how bad this virus is, and then we can try and find a balancing point. Because obviously from the virus standpoint, ideally, if anyone gets one, you quarantine them straight away and try and cure it as soon as possible so that nobody else gets it and they are saved as soon as possible. But normally, the reward is not worth it. That would make the cure worse than the problem, which is why you need to balance these things out, and that is exactly what he's trying to do. So, of course, Trump has been told, well, young people are less affected. So he's saying, for the young children, and students, it's really, just take a look at the statistics. It's pretty amazing. And yes, you're far less likely to die from coronavirus than just your regular risk of living, especially if you are at that student age. So he says, the BBC website says, the Republican president is keen to get Americans back to work and has praised governors who are moving to do so while criticizing others for not acting aggressively enough. The country, and this is so telling, is split over Mr. Trump's focus on protecting livelihoods. Critics accuse him of gambling with lives to serve his own political interests ahead of November's re-election bid. For a start, when this all went into lockdown, and CNN, MSNBC, and all those lovely alphabet networks representing the alphabet people were showcasing his White House briefing in full, then he was seeing an uptick in his approval. That is why they no longer show them in full, because they understand that's actually working for him, even though he was very tough in terms of a lockdown to begin with. It's okay, so that doesn't work in terms of the re-election idea. So then trying to say it's between, protecting livelihoods and gambling with lives. Just down to suicide alone, you see an increase in 10 to 40,000 suicides by 1% increase in unemployment. And we're looking at it going from about 3.5% to 25%, but at least the mid-teens. So at least a 10% rise, if not 20. In which case you're looking at over 100,000 people dead from the unemployment side of things. And of course, this is an exponential growth. Let's not mention the 130 million to starve to death according to the UN. So what did Fauci say? We know. He always says the same thing. So it is infectious, but it's not fatal. In England, they say that 1 in 400 people in England has coronavirus, tests suggest. Bear in mind that if you have it, you're supposed to quarantine for 2 weeks, which means they suggest that the incubation period is 2 weeks. So they're saying anybody here who has it must have got it in the last 2 weeks. We understand it's been around since last year. So in that case, if it's 1 in 400 now, or about 0.27%, and these will roll on and off every 2 weeks, you can't imagine they'll be significantly higher than this when we get to the antibodies. So nonetheless, they're saying it's 0.27%. Are we concerned about the vast number? Well, the BBC are. They're saying, it's going to be far more infectious, and we need to calculate the reproduction number, the R number, or transmission rate of the virus, and whether tracking the contacts of infected people is feasible. Or maybe we don't, because if it finds out that actually so many people have it, and as we say, like in prisons, 98% of the people tested there were asymptomatic with the disease, as in they showed no symptoms, then maybe you don't need to worry about it at all, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want. If it is really infectious, then you're going to have so many more cases, but you're not going to change the amount of deaths. In fact, you should really decrease it, considering the comorbidities and the people were going to die anyway. The average rate of the average age of death for people dying with coronavirus is above the average life expectancy anyway. So as I said before, they're kind of living on borrowed time. So it's not really a problem. So they say 1 in 400 in a country the size of England equates to 150,000 people. Imagine trying to trace the contacts of that many. And of course, while the survey suggests there are 150,000 infected people out there, it doesn't tell us who they are. No, but there are at least that then. You're saying 150,000 infected right now, but it had to get to that number somehow, and it's been around for months. And if you're saying that the lockdown has had an effect, then we would expect that number to be lower than it was a couple of weeks ago, in which case you're soon racking up to millions, which I think we all know already. Quite a few of us were ill over the December-January period, and as soon as these antibody tests come out, which is very soon, then we will definitely know. So, the test to find out whether people have been infected with coronavirus in the past has been approved by health officials in England. Finally, as mentioned, from the Swiss pharmaceutical company Roche, very positive development. The government previously spent a reported £16 million buying antibody tests, which later proved to be ineffective, which shows that they're actually willing to try and do something. This one here said that, as in the effectiveness of it, the accuracy, found that if someone had been infected, it gave the correct result 100% of the time. But how do you know? What are the tests you're using and how reliable are they? If someone had not caught coronavirus, then it gave the correct result more than 99.8% of the time. It means that fewer than 2 in 1,000 healthy people would be incorrectly told they had previously caught the coronavirus. I'll give it to you. Which is great. I mean, they might wish to, of course, play that up to say that the 2 in 1,000, that once we get the antibody tests out and it turns out most people have already had it, then they want to say, oh, it's because it's not as reliable as we thought it was. But hey, it's Swiss. Isn't that good? Because it's not English. I thought that was supposed to be good. But nonetheless, it's good news because that means that it's finally going to come here. We're going to know how many people have it pretty soon as those tests start rolling out. And then hopefully we can all get back to normal. Not soon enough for the schools, of course, but hey, hopefully homeschooling has worked to be away from the indoctrination. So, I hope you enjoyed all that good news, and until next time, as always, have a good one.